was supposed to be a routine drive home. The highway stretched out before me, empty and silent, with only the faint hum of my car engine to keep me company. I hated driving these back roads at night. There was something unnerving about how the trees swallowed the sky, leaving only the stars as distant guides. But tonight felt different. The fog, thick and impenetrable, clung to the asphalt like a living thing, twisting and curling in unnatural patterns under the headlights. As I rounded a sharp curve, a warning bell went off in my head. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Something wasn't right. The fog seemed denser somehow, heavier, almost as if it was trying to block my way. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard, just after midnight. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then, through the swirling mist, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, barely visible, no more than 30 feet away. My stomach dropped. I slammed on the brakes, tires screeching. The car skidded, but no impact came. There was no thud, no body hitting the windshield. Nothing. My heart pounded as I stared at the road ahead, expecting to see a crumpled form lying in front of my car. But the man was gone. Just gone. I blinked, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. A trick of the fog, I told myself. Maybe a shadow. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The image of the man standing in the mist felt too real, too solid to be a mere illusion. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling on the wheel. I had to be sure. What if I had hit him and he'd stumbled off, injured, hidden by the fog? I couldn't just drive away without knowing for certain. Grabbing the flashlight from the glove compartment, I stepped out into the thick, damp air. The fog was even denser outside, muffling every sound, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. I shivered, though the night wasn't cold. The only noise was the crunch of gravel beneath my feet as I walked to the spot where I'd seen him. I swung the flashlight left and right. The beam barely cut through the fog, illuminating nothing but empty road. Then I saw them, footprints. Fresh, wet imprints in the dirt, leading off the highway and disappearing into the trees. My breath caught in my throat. Against every instinct telling me to get back in the car and drive, I found myself following them. I don't know why. Maybe guilt, maybe curiosity. Either way, I couldn't stop myself. The air was colder here, heavier. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes in the mist. As I stepped off the asphalt and onto the soft ground of the forest, I felt the weight of the fog pressing down on me, the air thick with moisture and something else. Something wrong. The footprints led deeper into the woods. The further I went, the more isolated I felt, as if the rest of the world had vanished behind me. I could barely see a few feet in front of me. The flashlight flickered for a moment, and my heart leapt into my throat. I tapped it, and the light steadied, but my unease only grew. And then I saw him again. Just ahead, standing at the edge of my flashlight's reach. His back was turned to me, his figure partially obscured by the swirling mist. His head was lowered, his posture slouched, as if he were waiting. "Are you okay?" I called, my voice sounding too loud, too intrusive in the eerie silence. He didn't move. He didn't even flinch. I took a few cautious steps closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling as it illuminated his soaked clothes. His hair was wet, matted down like he'd been walking in the rain for hours. "Hey, I think I might have hit you with my car. Are you hurt?" Still nothing. Something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. But I was close enough now to see his face, and I wish I hadn't been. His head turned slowly. The movement was deliberate, unnatural, as if his neck didn't want to cooperate. And then he smiled. The smile was wide, far too wide. His lips stretched impossibly long, curling up to reveal teeth. Too many teeth. His eyes were sunken, hollow, and his skin was pale, far too pale, as if he'd been drained of life. That smile, it was wrong, not human. It was the kind of smile a predator makes when it knows you can't escape. My heart raced, terror freezing me in place. His eyes locked onto mine, his grin growing even wider, stretching his face into something monstrous. And then he moved. He lunged. Faster than I thought possible, he darted toward me, arms outstretched. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I barely had time to scream as I turned and bolted back toward the road. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding against the ground, impossibly fast. I ran harder, my pulse thundering in my ears. The car was so close, just a few more steps. I could feel him right behind me, his breath cold against the back of my neck. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as his hand smacked against the window. His face, grinning and twisted, pressed against the glass, his eyes never leaving mine. He was still smiling, that horrific, unnatural grin, as his fingers scratched against the window, leaving streaks of condensation. I fumbled for the keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, the tires spinning wildly before they found traction, and the car lurched forward. I didn't dare look back. The fog closed in behind me, swallowing the road and everything in it. I didn't stop until I reached the lights of the next town. Even then, my heart wouldn't stop pounding, and I couldn't get the image of that man, or whatever he was, out of my head. I never drove that highway again. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined the whole thing, but deep down, I know the truth. There's something in the mist. It's waiting, and if you're unlucky enough to cross its path, it won't let you go. What do you think was lurking in the mist? Was it a mere figment of the narrator's fear, or was something far more malevolent waiting to strike? Have you ever felt like something was watching you from the shadows, just beyond sight? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story sent shivers down your spine, stay close. The next tale, The Vanishing Hitchhiker, will take you on a haunting journey even deeper into the unknown. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I never pick up hitchhikers. It's one of those unspoken rules, especially on long, lonely drives through the mountains at night. But that night, something felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion from hours of driving, or maybe it was the strange pull of curiosity that made me slow down when I saw her, standing by the side of the road, thumb out, her figure barely visible in the dim beam of my headlights. The woman looked out of place, wearing an old-fashioned dress, like something from the 1950s. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and her pale skin seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. She stood completely still, arms at her sides now, as if she already knew I was going to stop. Against my better judgment, I did. I rolled down the window, feeling the cool mountain air rush into the car. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. But something felt off, like a knot forming in my stomach. She didn't smile. She didn't move much at all. "Just down the road," she said, her voice soft and distant, like she was speaking from another time. A faint chill ran through me. There was something unnatural about her stillness, something that made my skin crawl. Still, I unlocked the door. "Hop in?" The woman slipped into the passenger seat without a word, pulling the door closed with a soft click. As soon as she was inside, the temperature in the car seemed to drop. She stared straight ahead, her face pale and expressionless in the faint glow of the dashboard. I felt a strange tension in the air, but I shook it off, telling myself it was just nerves. After all, it was late, and I was already on edge from the long drive. We drove in silence, the road winding through the dark mountain pass. I glanced at her occasionally, but she didn't move or speak, just sat there, staring into the darkness beyond the windshield. Her presence made the car feel colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. The air in the car felt heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. "Where exactly do you need to go?" I asked after a while, my voice cracking slightly as I fought to keep calm. "Just a little farther," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the road ahead. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I glanced over at her again, and that's when I noticed it. Her reflection in the passenger side mirror. Or rather, the lack of one. My breath hitched in my throat. She was sitting right there, but in the mirror, there was nothing. No shadow, no outline, just the empty seat. A wave of panic surged through me. My pulse quickened, and I fought the urge to slam on the brakes. The silence in the car grew thicker, suffocating. The mountain road twisted and turned through the darkness, the trees closing in on either side. The woman's presence felt like a weight, something cold and unnatural, filling the air with a heavy sense of dread. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew this wasn't right. The road ahead grew darker, more winding, as we entered the deepest part of the mountain pass. There were no streetlights, no other cars, just the narrow stretch of road cutting through the night. The silence between us became oppressive, as if the air itself was too thick to breathe. Suddenly, she spoke again, her voice lower, more hollow. "It's just up ahead." I didn't respond. My heart was pounding in my chest, every muscle in my body screaming to get her out of the car. My hands were trembling, gripping the wheel so tightly I thought I might snap it in half. I rounded the next bend, my headlights sweeping across the gravel shoulder. "Here," she said, her voice a flat whisper. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding slightly as it came to a stop on the shoulder. I turned to ask if this was really her stop, but the words died in my throat. She was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. I hadn't heard a sound. 1 second she was there, and the next, nothing. For a moment I sat frozen in my seat, staring at the empty space beside me. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I could still feel the cold where she had been sitting, could still smell the faint scent of something old, like mothballs or dust. I scrambled out of the car, my heart racing. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't wake me from the nightmare I was in. The road was deserted. No sign of her, no sign of anyone. I walked around the car, searching the darkness for any trace of her, but there was nothing, just the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and my own panicked breathing. That's when I saw it, a small, weathered sign at the side of the road. I hadn't noticed it before, probably because it was so faded, almost illegible. But as I walked closer, the words became clearer. "In memory of Elizabeth Hall, 1934 to 1957. Gone but never forgotten." My blood ran cold. I stumbled back to the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the door handle. As I slid into the driver's seat, the chill in the air felt sharper, more biting. I slammed the door shut and gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't shake the image of her face, the way she'd stared straight ahead, as if she knew exactly where she was going. The way her voice had sounded, distant and disconnected, like it was coming from somewhere far away. I later learned that Elizabeth Hall had been a young woman who died in a car accident on this very stretch of road over 50 years ago. And every few years, drivers reported seeing her, hitchhiking, looking for a ride that she would never complete. I haven't driven that road since. But sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the roads are empty, I think about her, wondering if she's still out there, waiting for someone to take her home. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video,